Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Untitled Reviews. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are dramas. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of Devils, a great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, the financial world is something I'm not that well versed in, so a lot of this stuff I feel like has a tendency to kind of go over my head, just so some of what you got to experience in the show. I thought it was kind of interesting that this show is taking place in 2011. I guess because of obviously like with the financial situation at that time, because obviously their focus in the background is what's happening in Greece. So I just thought, but I guess because because obviously this is based on a book, so maybe it's specifically pulling from that time frame from the book. But I just think it's interesting. I would have just expected this to take place modern day, but maybe because of the financial situation in 2011 specifically, that's why the show is pulling from that, because it's everything since regardless. I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But obviously we get introduced to Matsumo and his whole situation, because obviously he's trying to work his way up the ladder, but then there's one particular dude, Ed, who obviously because obviously Dominic is Ed's kind of racist, and it's because obviously for Massimo it's is it because I didn't grow up drinking tea and playing cricket or something like that, I think is what he was getting at. So for Ed it's he might be a bit of a racist, but the fact of the matter is he will never work this job if you end up getting that position, and he's got a lot of people in the who will be willing to give it it's like a board that would basically give out this job. It's he's got a lot of connections on that board or group, so he's a kind of a shoo-in. And so it's will you be okay with working under him is kind of what Dominic's trying to get across. Obviously Massimo never really answered that, but it's kind of a big no, because I think for him it's no, I'm more qualified for the job than he is. But so, nevertheless, it's so interesting, too, because this episode kind of shows you that, Massimo isn't just in this on his own. His team has got his back. They're because obviously they're hey, you get this new position, we get, I would have assuming was his old job. So it's oh yeah, which one of us is going to get? Paul's not here, so screw him. It's just between the two of us. But it's they are super ride or die. It's whatever you need to do, boss, we got you. It's that's loyalty, which is interesting, because that's a whole thing Dominic's trying to get across in the episode too, about can I trust, are you loyal? And so I just think it's interesting, because regardless, let's break down the episode, because obviously Massimo kind of feels later on Ed Stewart is trying to sabotage him at every point, because obviously he gets told to go up to this room, and lo and behold, he's about to get a lap dance. He takes off the woman's mask because he recognizes it's a tattoo. He's Carrie. Turns out that's his ex-wife, which technically, legally, they are still married, so she's just straight up his wife. But it's wait, what? One of his people was maybe it's coincidence. It's no, whoever set this up wanted specifically that. So it's Ed wants you out of the way because Ed really doesn't like you. Even to the point he ended up being oh, because of people like you. And I'm yo. And even Massimo's people like me. It's oh shit. He's blatant about his racism, because it's oh, this business used to represent something. It used to have values, basically. People trust their money with us. But what did Massimo do? He took a big gamble. Granted, it worked out for the bank. They made a $250 million profit. But it's still a thing of he doesn't but it's do you not like it because I guess for him it's probably oh, I know what kind of person you are, you're taking this place low or something like that. And Massimo was I grew up low, so for me there's only one way, and there was only up for me. He's sadly for you, there's the only way for you is down. And it's whoa, because obviously Massimo's trying to find Carrie. Obviously, we get a little insight into the relationship. We see a little bit of a flashback, but it's why here? Why is she here? What happened between you two for you to be for one, trying to bury your relationship with her? Because it turns out not just her. Obviously, Sophia kind of brings up some stuff about his past, about where he grew up. He's how you know that? He scrubbed the web. I guess he reinvented himself, because it sounds like he came from a very poor upbringing. And maybe it's that type of thing, and maybe the kind of world he grew up in is you do what you got to do to survive. So he reinvented himself, cut ties with anything connected to that, because we don't know him and Carrie's situation because obviously we saw his hair being a little different at one point in time, but there's also another thing where we see his hair shorter. So I'm assuming that was supposed to be either that was him imagining things having worked out with him and Carrie, or maybe that was an actual memory, whatever the case may be. But we don't know the time frame of the relationship and stuff like that. Maybe while they were together, he hadn't reinvented himself until like sometime afterwards. He reinvented himself to work at this bank and everything. It's very interesting, like how they go about sabotage. Like, I mean, it's a very like sharks smell blood in the water and they're willing to strike. And it's like nobody wants to be the chum in this situation. No, chum isn't the word I'm looking for. Or is chum the word I'm looking for? Yeah, I think, chum is exactly the word I'm looking for. Nobody wants to be, the bait. No one wants to be the food in a, shark-infested waters, So it's just interesting to see Ed and Matsumo kind of go for each other's throats in different regards. Like Ed potentially being the one behind all that. Granted, we never know for sure because nothing's ever clearly ties Ed to the whole Carrie thing, nothing directly, so it makes you wonder, was that someone else doing that and Ed just ended up catching the flag? Like he was supposed to be like the fall guy in that, but to be fair, he's the only one that's been blatantly clear about how he dislikes Matsumo. So it makes you wonder. Obviously, so Matsumo like hires Oliver, which we learned a little bit about him. He's a dude trying to make money, and so he's willing to he's taking people's tests for them, and it's kind of a thing of like he's kind of done some like. Obviously, he's kind of like the, uncovered dirt type of dude. And the fact is, he leaked a whole bunch of, research papers because he was like, yeah, because I want, students shouldn't have to pay for the something like that. I guess he's kind of almost like in his own right, he's a hacktivist, I guess, type of situation, kind of like I'm fighting for the people, but it's like he still needs to kind of do whatever he can to get by. So he gets hired by Matsumo to look into this Ed thing, obviously, because obviously they shorted Davenport's business, or at the very least made it, shortened it just so that it would get Ed's attention. Because basically they want this deal that Ed has going to blow up in his face because it's like a $50 million thing. It's a shit ton of money that they would have to pay out if Ed's investment in Davenport and stuff kind of blew up in his face. So that whole scene with Oliver in the restaurant, I assumed that was them, we didn't bring our phones with us because we had a feeling we were being... That's what I thought it was, but I guess it's because, no, they sat me in a... Because he's saying, he got a seat next to him. It's no, he got a seat out the way, so it's he wasn't close enough to get a signal. I thought it was supposed to represent the fact is that they didn't have their phones on them. But it's luckily, Oliver is kind of good at, noticing things, so he kind of figured home dude Davenport was sick. Granted, it turns out his hunch was right, but it's just it was just a hunch at that, which, I guess, from what we can see, he is pretty smart. Matsumo seems like he's the same way too, because the deal he came up with, he the thing that made them that huge profit at the beginning of the episode was the fact is that he was able to we see all those numbers flooding and he's just waiting for the right moment to kind of strike. So, and it's how'd you figure that out? He was it was a gut feeling. So you have all of that. Then you have the Sophia situation when it seems she's just a journalist interested in interviewing him because it's you're a foreigner, I'm a foreigner. So, but then it's oh no, she's not just some blogger that she makes herself out to be. Because at one point you see a camera from far away. I'm is she recording this? It's is she setting him up? I didn't know, not unless that was someone else doing that. Or maybe that's just a nearby camera. It didn't seem like that necessarily played a part in the episode, but regardless, it might play a role later on. Who knows? But it's she knows all this information about him, where that he's that he's tried to scrub, and it turns out she's asking all these questions about Greece's current economic situation. But he notices that when he's over there near his pictures of his wife and stuff like that, because it's because she knows about Carrie and everything, he looks down, he finds a camera, so he kind of confronts her about it, because it turns out she's part of this, as he describes it, an anarchist group that almost because it's the dude is actually being interviewed, what was it, Subterrana? I forgot what the group's name is, but she's a part of it, which she's denying that she's a part of it, because even he was yeah, but, she's how'd you find out? And he was like you said, even when you scrub the web, nothing's ever completely gone. But it's he found a roundabout way by getting this group to be the ones that publish the information about Davenport, because if they put it out there, whether it's true or false, they're the ones shortening like his stock. So it's like if it gets tied back that they're doing, like they could all get super screwed over by this. But once again, like the fact is they're all ride or die. It's like oh man, I mean, it makes you wonder how he was able to kind of, acquire such loyalty. But that's also the thing you have to think about too. It's like, well, considering what this world is, loyalty, it's like, is it just money, or is it, or is it well-earned loyalty? I mean, we haven't spent enough time with Matsumo to actually know, in what regard. Because it was interesting, because even Dominic was like, yeah, it don't seem like you really, doesn't seem like you like the whole thing with money, it's almost like you almost resent the money. It's kind of what he was talking about, like, I guess I think it's more so because I think it's probably like the more money he acquires, all it does is remind him of where he came from and never wanting to go back. But it might be the thing of the evils of money. Like the fact of the matter is having none at one point in time in your life makes you just kind of disdain it. No matter how much I guess because maybe it's like no matter how much you accomplish and no matter how much you get, you'll always feel like that person like who knows what it's like to probably, starve to never being able to get what you want, to not to have what you need, type of situation. Or, maybe that's me, reading too much into that. We also learned a bit about Dominic in this episode. We learned that he had a son, John, who ended up dying. He was joined the military and ended up dying. And obviously it's kind of a thing of like, yeah, my son, he sacrificed, his privilege to go fight for his country. And obviously, like, his wife, Nina, doesn't care about that because she's like, oh, he has the audacity to talk about sacrifice, because she basically blames him because, like, Matsumo's kind of like, Dominic didn't tell John to join the military. It's like, yeah, but he joined the military to get away from Dominic. And it's like, and I'm sure, and he didn't do everything he could to pull him away from it. It's like, she wanted him not away from all that. But obviously for John, it's like, he would rather die than give his dad the satisfaction of being like, oh, I was right, Hud, you couldn't cut it. Like, his dad's probably kind of, I mean, once again, we haven't really gotten to the ins and outs of him, but it's like, for her, it's like, I lost my son. It seems like it's been 3 years, but still, like, obviously, it's probably just a constant reminder. We don't know the ins and outs of their relationship, but she's like, basically, he kind of basically almost like ruins and destroys everyone near him. It's kind of like, you would know that more so than anybody, because obviously, like, Matsumo kind of spends so much time around Dominic, which is so interesting because obviously the beginning of the episode, it's like, it's like the devil's greatest trick is make you believe he doesn't exist, and obviously you see everyone else is frozen, but then Dominic's the one that's like doing the slow clap and everything, and it's like, oh, he's whispering in your ears, I've drunk wine with him or something, so it's kind of being like, it's kind of interesting from the very beginning, painting Dominic as just kind of almost like Satan himself. It's like, geez, is he really that bad? But I guess it's like, once again, it's like, it's that world. Like I said, even as we see in this episode, it can be so cutthroat that rather than kind of working together, I mean, it's the type of environment that it's competition, but the fact is, you don't have to go for the jugular. A lot of time in competition, it seems like, obviously in this world of financing, yes. Because Sophia had even asked about whether or not this bank that he works for is actually, if this bank is actually responsible for what went down in Greece, because it's not the most, that, there's a lot of shady business going on with this bank, and maybe that also ties into Dominic specifically out of anybody, but maybe it kind of deals with all of them at the place. But Matsumo had hired Oliver to find, Carrie, and he does, but it turns out like she was at a place and she had overdosed, so he got her to a hospital. At the same time, well, everything, like, at first, Stuart's happy because it looks like everything's coming up roses for him, but then it all comes crumbling down when, like, Davenport has to admit, like, yeah, like, all those rumors, they're true. The fact of the matter is, I would have rather, have told my family myself. And once again, that's kind of like the thing of it. They're like, boom, Davenport, you're going down. Screw you, Stuart. Like, that's the thing. I was hoping I was wondering if at least one of them was going to be like, that is kind of sucky what we did. It's like, no, they don't seem like they care. They just kind of like enjoying, at least one of them seemed like, the one with the kind of reddish hair, he seemed like he might have been a little more reserved about it, but the other two seemed like they were okay. Like, I don't know, maybe I was reading too much. He seemed like he was the most kind of like, oh, that is kind of fucked up what we did, but at the end, it's like, they didn't care if they were kind of ruining someone's life, if it meant screwing Stewart over, because it's like, yeah, Davenport, you gotta have to suffer so that I can take down Stewart, so that I can come out on top and get this job in this position. Kind of don't get it anyway, because it's like, oh, Dominic's like, you should have told me about Carrie, and it's like, so who told you? So I won't get the position because of Carrie? It's like, yeah, you're bipolar, drug taking, because she's an addict. Wife who's still technically your wife. It's like, you should have come to me, you should have told me ahead of time. It's like, our people will never be able to support like obviously that was the whole reason in the beginning, was to try and bury the whole Carrie situation as soon as she resurfaced, simply because he knew that it would compromise his position, his chances of getting the job, and it kind of blew up in his face. He thinks it's Stewart, but then, like, Dominic is like, are you paranoid? Like, are you loyal? And he's leaving and he's pissed off and everything. And then we kind of come full circle with the beginning, where we see the body falling, and it turns out it's because part of me was wondering, was it going to be like an interesting thing where we start at the end and then work our way to the beginning, and we kind of did that. But I thought it was going to be a thing of like super far in the future, where it's like, oh, that person is actually, I was like, oh, we're going to start, like, I was wondering if it was Massimo who died, and like the entire series is getting up to, I thought that might have been it, but it's like, no, it's Stewart. Now the question is, did Stewart jump? Because he had plenty of reason to jump, considering everything, like his world kind of imploded on him. You could also make the argument maybe Massimo did it, because it's like, you were super pissed enough, you were working your way up, because his wife was, Stewart's wife was looking for him, but then at the same time, it makes you wonder, did Dominic say something to Ed that set him off and made him go, like, feel the need to do that, because he was like, oh, it's all over. I mean, to be fair, he poured so much into this, and it would have been his reputation, his job, like, he would have suffered in many different regards because of this mistake. So, but then everyone's gathered like, oh my God, like, the police are obviously involved in looking into it, but then it's like, I think it is probably just going to simply be a suicide situation, but it's like, and I thought it was kind of interesting at the end, where Matsumo was talking about the fact is, the devil's greatest trick isn't making you believe he doesn't exist. It's flattering you so that you can't see that the devil is you. And you see this look on his face, almost kind of like, yeah, it's kind of sucky that Stewart's dead, but less competition. Like, it has that feel, that air about it, where it's just kind of like, what are you willing to do to get to the top? Even that line, it's in the trailer and it's also in this episode, like, no one deserves this success. It's like, that's, I don't know. Like, this level of success, like, no one, like, I think it's meant to imply, like, no one deserves it. Like, you work hard to get this level of success. Or maybe that was him just being cocky, like, yeah, no one deserves this much success, but I did it because I'm amazing. Maybe you could, I feel like you could read that multiple ways. Maybe not. But, I don't know. From what we've gotten so far, it seems really interesting. I'm curious to see where things kind of go. A little behind the scenes. Maybe this might turn into a crime-centric. I don't know. It's really, it's like a drama thriller, and I don't know if I would necessarily clump that in. Like, if it has more crime drama elements to it in the future, I might switch it over to crime-centric. But if not, it's going to stay Untitled Reviews. It really doesn't matter. It's just for my own posterity's sake. I'm just very weird about just making sure everything's like properly labeled. I'm kind of like a little anal retentive about that type of shit. But regardless, like I said, I'm interested to see what the rest of the season has in store, for what the next episode has in store for us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.